Um, this situation isn't unique from the black experience, particularly because, like anything else, it's okay to be any other race than it is to be a nigga. In my 2 cents, and I don't say this shit is no victim mindset. I'm not looking for no cop out or no pleas. I'm calling it exactly what the fuck it is. It is okay for any other race to be adopted by any other race except for a nigga. Even in the case of niggas, I'm just being completely honest. We have situations where people adopt niggas for the money. I'm not saying this shit might not happen in other communities. I'm saying this shit happens abundantly in the black community.
But so I was coming across this topic, and this topic talks about it refers to it as transracial adoption. I think that should be interracial adoption. I don't know why they changed the term to transracial, or maybe it was always that and I just don't know. But interracial adoption sounds more like something less trans. At any rate, transracial adoption, it's a thing. And so I came across this topic and I wanted to know what you guys think about it from the perspective of those that have went through it. I'm gonna go ahead and share this video.
Transracial adoption should not be allowed. 3, 2, 1, go.
I mean, I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
We're all transracial adoptees. That would be saying that you would be against your own adoption. And I think I just want to add also, it's different from being colorblind. That's not why I'm here, just to clarify.
Okay, theoretically, let's say we were on agree for one reason. Do you guys have any gripes against transracial adoption?
Well, yeah, like I guess like what I just said a little bit.
Savior complex.
Savior complex?
I mean, there are people in the world who I think view transracial adoption as this like, oh, I'm doing a cool thing. Like, I've met people who have said those specific things where they're like, I've always just wanted a black child, you know, but that's it. There's no like, why do you want a black child? Or, you know, or like, it was like a savior mentality almost. And
I think that adopted kids are more at risk for struggle, not because of us, but because of society and because of the dominant narrative of white saviorism that is all surrounding adoption. We all know this narrative, but the narrative for those that don't know is this notion of adoptees should feel lucky, adoptees must be grateful, and gratitude is related to this idea of repayment. The effect of that is that we as adoptees, as a whole community, feel like we're less worth than our non-adopted counterparts. It makes us feel like you should repay your life that you were given. You should repay the fortunes that were given to you. And for little kids, how can we repay something that's immeasurable? And it's not fair for us as little kids to have that weight, that burden on us while growing up. And because we have that weight, because we have that burden, that's what, so to speak, messes us up.
You're bringing back some stuff. I'm like,
Yeah.
so true. Like, Jesus.
do think that it's really important as the further we go to have that education and to not go in with it with a colorblind stance, because it does do a lot more harm, at least it did for me growing up, than, yeah, just opening up your kids to the culture that they came from.
Yeah, no, you really spoke to something. All my friends that are Black or Arabic have all this culture that they grew up with, and they like years and years of like learning stuff, and that's what I missed out on. So for the future generations and people who are adopting right now, I think the biggest thing would be to stop being colorblind, because we're not helping the kids.
Yeah. I agree that everybody deserves a set of parents, family. Everybody deserves to be loved and nurtured and cared for. However, the recent legislation that almost didn't pass, I guess, for ICWA, which is the Indigenous Child Welfare Act, being Native American and not adopted by Native Americans, I don't know anything. You know, there's so much about my life that just didn't make sense until I went out and learned it myself. So I feel like that small community of Native children need to stay with other Natives. It doesn't have to be the same tribe, but just keep them Native, because, you know, our population's declining.
I mean, I am standing here where I am, but I do think it is a little bit of a privileged place to be standing, because I think the reality of adoption in the US and culture in the US is that it's very hard to be a person of color here in this country. You know, my parents were white. My parents being white will never understand what it's like to be a person of color in the US.
Yeah.
And they're not going to be able to connect with me in that way, which is kind of a big deal. Now, there are other things that they do really, really well, but the reality is living here is kind of tough for a person of color, and they can recognize that for me, but they can't know what my experience is.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to poo-poo transracial adoption, because when you got a country as big as ours with a population that's majority white, obviously by default you're going to have white people adopting children of other races, but it comes with some issues. So if there was a way to ensure that children could end up, and maybe some of you, maybe Paula, maybe Sheffy, you guys work in that social space, is there something to where they at least try to pair children with those of a similar racial or ethnic background?
Well, I know when it comes to adoption, there's a lot of different layers. So, for example, the ease of adoption for Black people is just not there. Then I've only heard this and read about it, but when it comes to adopting a white child versus adopting a Black child, it's easier to adopt a Black child. There's racism within adoption when it comes down to it. So there's that whole aspect when it comes to actually adopting Black children versus white children, and even children of other cultures and everything. So there's that. I also, I have a lot of mixed feelings about it too. There's a lot of kids in my area, a lot of Black kids with white adoptive parents. And like, I know a lot of the kids, so I've gotten to know the parents, and I do often wonder if that white savior complex is there within them, because some of these kids, they're adopted, with their siblings and everything, and then you hear, oh, their mom was on drugs, their dad was on drugs. You hear the trauma that the kids have been through, and it's like, oh, sad, glad someone stepped in to help them, but at the same time, you wonder, did you just step in to save them? What was your issue? Or then you hear about the foster system when it comes down to that, and how people do get, money for foster kids. And you wonder, is this your way of getting, that extra money? And, I've looked at some of the dynamics with some of these parents and the kids and everything. And one particular family was like, it seemed like a very healthy dynamic. But with the other family, the kids were not exposed to their culture, even though in this area of my town, it's majority Black. Their school's majority Black. You have the options there, and I've seen it change over time. I don't know if someone said anything, but you just wonder, like, are you trying to teach them about their culture? Are you opening that up? So when I hear these teenagers and adults say that, that they're missing out on it, and that white savior complex is very real, and they have struggled with it, it just really puts it into perspective.
All right. Somebody else giving y'all thoughts on it, because like they said, that white saviorism is a thing that they have to deal with, and
Yeah, I'm gonna
for the
jump
rest
in.
of their life. Go ahead, Chef.
So you got to think about this even past adoption. If you remember back to the George Floyd incident, there were whole families that were broken up because of young Black men that had white moms. Suddenly,
And hold on, pause. And they are going to talk about this a little bit later, but go ahead.
yeah, suddenly there was this differential in, oh, well, you're not like that. But it's like, but no, mama, I look just like that. So there was that problem there as well. I think a lot of white people are so removed from the Black experience that they think they are doing well by stepping in to quote unquote save. And even for those that are their blood children, they position themselves as like their child is somehow different, when they're not. They're still part of the same, cultural representative. And I just think they're just so far removed from it, they don't realize that that's what they're doing. For some, they do it intentionally. Of course, we do have those folks who will intentionally go after impoverished people because they, are going to get money and things like that in the foster system. We know that is happening. Um, but I think a lot of people think the way to do good is to be saviors versus being advocates, and they don't know the difference.
Mm.
Yeah.
But if I'm
Being an advocate means standing in the gap. Being a savior is, you owe me for stepping in for you, kind of thing. And that's what these kids seem to be, talking about. Like, the one big issue I see with a lot of those adoptive families is this: the kid is suddenly removed from the culture that should be a part of them. And that new family is like, well, you're a part of our culture, you're a part of our family. Okay, but you can't negate the rest of who I am too,
Right.
just because I'm here. Because being an advocate means, okay, well, if I have this little black girl here in the house and she has black girl experiences, let me make sure I surround her by a village of black women so that she can be empowered by who she actually is, not who I want her to be. And I think that's the
Absolutely.
problem. They just don't know they should, and it's just because they're so removed from the experience that it doesn't even factor.
I I would, I didn't even, I wasn't even able to relate to this in any way, shape, or form from like actual experience or even observation, because the um the children that I grew up around was very few. There's only a few adoptees and foster families that I encountered, and they were black people that adopted black people or foster black people. But I was in Atlanta at the time, so I mean, everybody's black, right? But I remember when we had our daughters and we lived in Miami, and we lived in a very mixed neighborhood. But the school they went to was more white than anything else, or it was less black than anything else. And I remember my daughters, I think it was their preschools. The preschool they went to preschool and they had beads in their hair, and they were always getting questioned about their beads. And my daughters, they won't even remember this, but they were just like, why don't other girls have beads? They wanted to know why they were the only ones that had beads, especially my daughter Morgan, because Michelle wasn't there yet. Why am I the only kid with beads? And I remember thinking about that. I'm like, man, I can't wait to relocate again so I can put them back into a space where they can see, they can have a mirror put up. And so when we got back to Atlanta, we moved to the east side, of course. They went to school, they still had their beads, and they were just so excited. It's other girls there with beads. And so I take that and compare it to what Sheffy is saying is about that experience. If the white parents would at least give them access to that black experience, then at least they would still have some of that. You can still be a parent, you can still step in, but you can also kind of give them get that experience as well. Jamel, was you about to say something a second ago? I saw your thing bubble up, or you mute.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep it short because I tend to run my mouth. Um, um, this situation isn't unique from the black experience, particularly because, like anything else, it's okay to be any other race than it is to be a nigga. In my 2 cents, and I don't say this shit is no victim mindset. I'm not looking for no cop out or no pleas. I'm calling it exactly what the fuck it is. It is okay for any other race to be adopted by any other race except for a nigga. Even in the case of niggas, I'm just being completely honest. We have situations where people adopt niggas for the money. I'm not saying this shit might not happen in other communities. I'm saying this shit happens abundantly in the black community. That white savior shit exists simply because, and what's funny is it's okay for a white person to adopt any race because they're welcoming fucking white saviorism. To some extent, it's okay for that shit to be accepted because they think whiteness is rightness. They think that's what's going to heal the problem that's facing that particular person. Like,
Right.
I don't know, bro. My 2 cents is it don't matter where a black child, black person goes. At the end of the day, they're taking their skin with them, and that's the problem that everybody has. Like, that's what everybody takes an issue with. You understand what I'm saying? So I don't know. It's kind of weird to me to I don't like the idea of transracial adoption anymore. Not anyway. Let me keep my fucking opinions to myself. I don't like the idea of it. I don't like the idea of it in general because at the end of the day, that black child's gonna suffer regardless. Whether it's an Indian family, a fucking white family, a Chinese family, I'm telling you that black child's gonna suffer regardless. Because much like I think Sheffy said earlier in regards to the George Floyd situation, you feel some kind of way because you a fucking nigga and you want to go stand up and say something, but you can't because your family was different. Like that shit is wild to me. Like it's really unique because it's a uniquely black thing. This isn't something that any other race has to deal with. Only niggas.
Damn. Frank, you next in the rotation. We going all the way around. We gonna close it out with Jessica. Go ahead. Sit on up.
All right. It's like being caught in between. Where there's you want these black kids to find a home, regardless, but at the same time, you know the potential issues that's gonna arise even when they are adopted by a white family. The thing about it is these people, white people, live in a white bubble. Their views, their experiences in America is completely different from black people. And so when they adopt black kids, they try to force that societal view and the privileges that comes with it that warps their view of society. They try to convince these black kids that what they're experiencing isn't what they're experiencing because they've never experienced what these black kids are experiencing. You know what I'm saying? So when a black kid come home and say, well, the teacher gives Billy more Capri Suns than I get. First thing that white mama or dad is gonna think is, well, maybe it's an oversight. And then, your teacher just made a mistake. Happens again. Couldn't possibly be, because this doesn't happen to your adoptive sisters and brothers who are white. So it's just you, and it's just the way that you're seeing it. But that's not the reality. But in fact, that is the reality of that black child. So I think that there's a potential of that black child being dismissed, their experiences being downplayed because their white parents haven't lived that same experience. You understand what I'm saying? So, and also that there's forced assimilation.
Yo, Frank, no bullshit, bro. It genuinely, I don't even think it's just reserved to whites, bro. I just saw a TikTok like a day ago, if that, where a fucking woman was disowned by her Indian family because she was fucking a nigga. Like, I really want people to put that shit in their mind. Like, this isn't something that's unique to America. Everybody hates niggas. This isn't something that's just reserved to America. You know what I mean? Like, we talk about other nations that have racism.
Oh no, it's
definitely global.
It's absolutely global, man. In outside of countries that are us, that look like us, and even if you go to South America, they dealing with some stuff where they don't even want their black and brown children to marry other black and brown children. You know, they want you to elevate by getting to somebody white. White is right around the globe. That is, we are in a time in the history of humanity where brown people are the major underdog. And this will be our experience, and we'll die with this experience. But at this time in human history, that's just what it is. Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, I agree with Frank. I'm kind of conflicted with this topic, just because you can't ban transracial adoption because we don't have enough minorities adopting or in a position to adopt or where they would get approved to adopt or be considered. So you can't get rid of it because where would the children go? You know, you don't want them to stay in the system forever. So we're kind of in this situation where you have resources and probably at the same time, if they're not going to ban, have to put programs in place to make sure that these parents are educated, to make sure that they are screened properly, to make sure that they are not doing this for their advantage, that they're not doing it for the wrong reasons, that they are not racist. And not only not racist, but, you know, I feel like a lot of people think that, a lot of white people think that racism is gone because they replaced it with progressions. It was just like the situation that, you know, Frank and Jamil just brought up, where it's like, you know, you're not doing blatant racism, but you're doing things like you're not letting that black child express themselves in a situation that happened that's gone global. Nobody else that's black can express themselves about, but you won't let them express it because, you know, you're exhibiting microaggressions. That's a microaggression. So
and we're gonna get into microaggressions too. Go ahead. We're gonna get into that.
So we have to just be a little bit more careful about who we're allowing to adopt. And I think we have to be a little bit more intelligent about screening these folks and making sure that they're not doing it for the wrong reasons, that they're not trying to shape the mind of Black people. You know, that's another thing that I think that maybe the intent of some of these folks, they're thinking, okay, I know how I'm going to get rid of racism. I'm going to teach these kids
I'm gonna adopt one, and I'm gonna get them right.
I'm going to tell them how to think about white people.
I fixed one.
Yeah, so
that's how we got Clarence Thomas.
Oh shit!
Exactly.
Let's get to microaggressions. I mean, you mentioned it, and I'm glad you mentioned that term. Like that's the very next part of this presentation is those microaggressions.
I have used microaggressions against my own race. Oof. 3, 2, 1, go.
I think when I was younger, there was definitely some jokes that I made, which I deeply regret, but trust me, I'm picking up the slack now. But I think it's also the fact that I was growing up countryside in like a predominantly white place made it so that like I accepted a lot of things, little comments or little jokes that I would just let slide, or people using the N-word. And I think when I started learning more about Black culture, that's when I was like, okay, that's really not okay, and this is why. But I think that also comes with maturity and age.
So I'm on strongly agree because I hated being Asian growing up. I despised it, man. My dad would give me a buzz cut, I had glasses, and so every time I went out, we just kind of would get looks because there's 5 adopted kids. And man, I just remember making the crudest, most horrible jokes because it, in a weird way, validated me as like an Asian almost, because in some way I felt like this is what was expected of me, to make these jokes, to make these comments, to make everyone laugh and feel comfortable about my adoption. And what I realized is, dang, like first off, I'm starting to believe this stuff. Second off, I'm doing it in service of others. Like I'm making these jokes to make other people feel comfortable.
I do identify with your story as well. I grew up also like hating that I was Asian, but like specifically Chinese. I would hear like kind of a negative connotation about Chinese, that like they're liars and they're ugly, and also being around predominantly white community and like in high school, like hanging out with a lot of group of girls that were often white and I was the token Asian, like just made me more and more hate my appearance and not think that I was attractive. I guess with being insecure with that, it's almost like, yeah, that internalized racism and like self-hatred that happens. So that's why I am on this side as well.
Oh, can I add one thing to that?
Yeah.
Like totally resonant with what both of you guys were saying. I was always proud to be Asian. I was proud of my differences. but I think it was always interesting reckoning with this idea of being proximal to whiteness. And what I mean by that is when white people growing up said, oh, like you're basically white, they were saying that to validate me as being like a first-class citizen because I'm like almost white because I was raised in a white family. And then when Asians would call me a banana, or when Asians would say, oh, well, you're not really Asian, that would hurt on a different level.
Yeah, I would get that too.
Because, of course, we are Asian. And yeah, it just feels incredibly invalidating.
I mean, for me, like, I'm on strongly disagree because I'm a proud Hispanic. Like, I'm Nicaraguense and I'm Honduran, and I'm always gonna be proud of that no matter what. And I get how some people can be like, oh, my race, like, it falls in my bloodline that, like, there's alcoholism, drug addicts, but I'm never gonna let that define my anger or my percentage of how I am or how I represent myself, ever.
Yes. So I would say with my family, like cousins, grandparents, all of that, the conversation of my adoption didn't really start happening until like when Mike Brown was shot. That was kind of the first time that I really felt invalidated by my own family, because I think I was trying to get them to recognize like I'm a Black woman and there are people right now who look like me that are going through very traumatic things, but my family didn't view it that way. I felt very invisible. Yeah, I didn't have anyone to relate to. All my family comes from a really small town in the Midwest, like 95% white, and to the point where like the KKK, it used to be a sundown town, like that kind of thing. And so, yeah, growing up, it just went from, I was just kind of there as Michaela, but not a Black person. It was more of just like, they would always say to me is like, I don't see you as Black. I just,
100%.
Yeah, you know,
and all the other time. And I was happy. I was glad.
Yeah.
I was like, yes, I'm not
Right.
gonna like be a victim of racism. Like,
yeah.
Yes.
At the time,
One of 'em.
Exactly. Yeah. It never bothered me at the time, but I think the more I processed it, the older I got, I realized how damaging that term is, because I mean, I think we've all experienced this of like, who am I? And so then I was like, okay, if my family doesn't see me as Black, what am I? You know, that was like the question that I still sometimes think today, even, that's like always in the back of my head. So, yeah.
100%.
So true.
I think they 100% validated every opinion that everybody had on this topic. They literally 100% validated everything that everybody said from their own personal experiences.
And that's the reason why I had the opinion that I have, because yo, that shit is damaging, bro. That fucking identity crisis, because that's what the fuck it is. That identity crisis is crazy, bro. I'm 36, man. I wasn't even adopted, and I had a fucking identity crisis trying to fit in. I was born in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, to a fucking immigrant family. I was raised in hip hop culture. I'm a nigga through and through, but I eat jerk chicken and curry chicken when I go home for dinner. You understand what I'm saying? That shit was fucking bananas. It was the wildest thing ever. So I can't imagine what that shit would feel like as a Black person being adopted by a white person. Bro, don't get me started, bro.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting how, especially with the Asian kids, how they were saying the ones who were saying how much they hated themselves and everything. And it's just so interesting how whether you're adopted, obviously, you know, based on what they're saying, and then if you're like that person where you're in a white community, you're like the only Black person, the only, you know, person of color, and those are your friends, those are your classmates, whatever. It's almost like it's a given that there is a subliminal message for you to hate yourself because you're not white, and you either have to have the, you know, support to fight against it, or like you said, the self identity to know who you are. But it's like, because you know, I grew up in Connecticut, and I grew up, you know, on the white side of my town, and a lot of the things they said about their experience, I experienced those things, and it had you questioning yourself. But I mean, when you're around, you know, the white community, it's like they want you to feel that way almost. And it's just wild to me how powerful that is, no matter where you are in this country. Like it's like they don't even have to know each other. You could someone living in Southern California, someone living in upstate New York, you know, the experience is the same.
Absolutely. When they mentioned the young lady mentioned the George Floyd situation and how her adoptive family wanted to separate her from that. You're not one of them. That won't happen to you. Um, and even Jamel, you mentioned it earlier. You know what I'm saying? Like if when something like that happens, they don't have that space. I remember, man, I went through a leadership course. I think there was a leadership presentation in the military, and the captain was a black guy, and he mentioned that he addressed how he walked in one day and he saw another black man, and they looked at each other. They just had a look right after everything blew up with the George Floyd situation. And of course, we know there was situation after situations that led up to that. And he said they just had a look and they just knew. But in that moment, they couldn't have that conversation. So he said, later on that day, if I remember this correctly, somebody came to his office and asked him how he was doing, a subordinate. And he said at that moment, he realized, like, man, I didn't even realize I was uncomfortable to even come here and deal with that. Like, because I didn't feel that I could, because I'm the minority in the space. So how am I supposed to? How's that supposed to look? And so I can't imagine being in a family and you're observing this stuff. It's a reality, but you can't acknowledge it. Nobody's going to come and sit down to you and say, hey, do you want to talk to somebody about it? I imagine somewhere, because, there's not a monolith. There's all people aren't all of one thing. I imagine that there is a white family somewhere that has adopted a black child or some black children, and they absolutely go out of their way to make sure. But I bet you that they are themselves in the minority of those. And being that we're the minority, obviously a majority of us aren't going to be in a place to adopt, because selfishly I'm not going to do it, because hey, I just, that's why I opened up. I'm like, my wife asked me all the time, hey, would you ever consider? And I'm like,
Yo,
don't
man,
do
well,
it
I had a
all
question
again.
for you. I had a question for you, right? Because even if that family does adapt and embrace that black child and try to entrench them in black culture, can you imagine what that shit would look like?
Oh,
Like what
it's
they
not
gonna
going to
start
be
doing?
enough.
Not real rap. Like not just consider this for a second, right? What they gonna start doing? Frying chicken, getting watermelon, braiding they
No, no,
fucking
no.
hair,
No,
watching
no.
Martin.
I think if it's genuine, I think if you
If
genuinely
it's
care,
genuine,
I'm talking
they
about
find other
genuine.
black people.
Yeah, you don't try to emulate. The worst thing,
Yes.
see
Yes,
Jamel pissed. The worst thing that they could
No,
do
I swear to God,
is
I'm not.
try to.
I'm not letting my anger guide me. I swear to God, I'm not. Right? I'm really just putting into
But no,
perspective.
I
'Cause
think
I don't believe all
the
white
way
people
it
are
looks
racist.
like. No, the way it looks, if a person is like Sheffy said earlier, you're being an advocate. The way it looks is, if you're a white mom and you have a black daughter, you take her, if you're in New Orleans, guess where you take that baby to get her hair done?
To the hood.
You get your happy ass in that pretty Tesla, you drive over to the hood, you find her salon, and you let that baby get her hair done. And you don't remove her, you go immerse yourself in where she's from, so you can absorb some of that and she can absorb that. Do not try to duplicate it. That would be the worst thing anybody could do.
Yeah,
So
it's no
keep in mind,
different than
that's
a
just
single mom who surrounds her son with men who impart, masculinity on him. You can't do the job yourself. You just can't. And anybody who sits there and be like, well, I can be the mom and the daddy too. No, you can't. You can't be the white parent and the black parent too. You have to immerse those children with other people who can stand in the gap. And even if we as black people are not adopting our children, we can still stand in the gap. We can be coaches, we can be teachers, we can be community
Mentors,
leaders.
absolutely.
These are the things that still benefit these children. But I think, it takes those parents to be cognizant to say, hey, I don't know enough about your experience to provide you the outlet that you need, but I'm gonna find you somebody who can.
Absolutely. That's what it looks like in a healthy manner. I hear what you're saying, Jamel. Hell yeah. If they try to duplicate or replicate, hell no. That would be the worst thing to do.
That's what I'm saying though. You keep taking into consideration, right? Not everybody. We talking about people today. Generally, we see this shit all over social media, right? Majority of people don't have the self-awareness to understand whether or not they're doing the right thing or the wrong thing to begin with. You understand what I'm saying? And they could be completely well-meaning. They might have the best of intentions. You track what I'm saying? They just might. Bro, we see it on I saw a movie not long ago. I want to say about 15 years ago now, with Queen Latifah and the nigga from American Pie. You feel me? I think it was called Bringing Down the House or some shit. You track what I'm saying? Completely well-meaning. If you look at his, I hate that this shit is a movie, but I know it happens in real life because I have white friends who have black children. I'm telling you what I know. And I had to talk to them to the side to let them know, like, bro, that's wild. Like you're performing a caricature of an actual black person thinking that you're making your child comfortable. You understand what I'm saying? They mean well, but they have no fucking clue that what they're doing is the complete opposite of well. You understand what I'm saying? Which is why it only damages the child at the end of the day. That's my perspective. This is why one of the reasons why I'm like, yo, I understand the need to adopt a child, but if we're gonna do this, I think it was, I can't see my glasses anymore. I want to say Paula, she had the perfect fucking answer. There got to be some kind of course or education or something to teach these people before they take these children on. Because at the end of the day, they're going to do what they think is normal. They out here listening to Snoop. You feel me? Drinking gin and juice out this motherfucker, thinking that it's completely okay.
They kids looking at them like, what now? For shizzle who?
Boy,
Right. They like, I got hot sauce in my bag swag. Like, we just saw this shit.
Man.
Hillary Clinton just did this shit on national fucking television, bro.
And you know what? Black people, we are so bad. Like, man, there's nothing
inviting everybody to the cookout.
Cringe it. Like, listen.
Yes, I hate that.
I'm gonna brag. I'm gonna give myself a little pat on the back because in my youth, it bothered me. Just something said this was not right when I believe Bill Clinton played the sax on Arsenio Hall. That's how I'm a little old. I'm dating myself.
Yes, I remember that.
And black people said, oh, he basically a black person because the motherfucker said he smoked weed and he played the sax on Arsenio Hall. He's what?
They called him the first black president.
Man, right. it did something to me back then. So we also have an issue with
white is right. We all know, call it what. Yeah, we also have an issue with white is right.
Yes, we accept the little buffoonery. And oh man, he rocked with us. And it happens. It happens so often, and it's I don't like it.
I mean, that's why you have to give more, like, respect to, say, a rapper like Eminem, who will consciously say, "I'm a visitor in hip hop."
Yeah, I'm a guest. I'm a guest. Yeah, he always says, "I'm a guest in the house of hip hop." Yeah.
Everybody wanted to put him on the same token as everybody else. He's like, "Nah, I'm a guest."
Yeah,
and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. But that takes awareness, and I think one of the
exactly.
Yeah, what you see with some white people is like, first they have to admit that there's a different experience, that blacks have a different experience.
Right.
Preach, queen. Please preach. Please preach.
And then from there, it's like, once you admit, okay, there's a different experience, you got to say, I cannot understand it fully because it will never happen to me. And I can't be the one or the only one to expose this child. There has to be that village, and it has to be that village who understands that experience. But the biggest thing that we have when it comes to racism or in bigotry is people even admitting that it exists.
Yeah. I would recommend, if you white and you adopt a black child, move your ass to a black neighborhood. There are relatively affluent black neighborhoods.
Bro, even that's dangerous. Dangerous.
Hey, but listen, it might be, but you can do so.
They be on next door acting up.
Hey man, let them. Hey, all I'm saying, they're affluent. You know what I'm saying? You know, I mean, we know
But
there's black
realistically,
people.
Manuel, even the affluent black neighborhoods are detached from what black culture is, fam. That's what I'm
Well,
saying.
yeah. Some of them
That's what
can
I'm
be. Some
saying.
of them can be.
My
Some of them
point
can be.
is, if you took a white family with a black child and dropped them in the hood, nigga, there'll be a Starbucks there next week.
Yeah,
because they're gonna complain about the noise and
It's
some
gonna be a
other stuff.
Starbucks there next week. It's gonna be a boba tea shop a block down, and there's gonna be high-rise fucking condos getting built left and fucking right. There's
Hot
no
yoga
winning in this
studio.
situation, is what I'm saying. The best bet, I think, is what Paula said: is to educate these people, let them stay in their fucking neighborhoods, educate these people, and find a way for them to cross the bridge, so to speak. I'm speaking New York because you got a bunch of bridges. Educate them for them to come across the bridge and then drench that child in that culture safely, for them to experience who the fuck they are as a black person while also being safe in whatever neighborhood they live in.
You know, well, they can move to the neighborhood. Look, man, white people can move to black neighborhoods easy. You know what? We think they the
No,
cops.
no,
We think they
bro.
the cops.
If
Nothing
I
Bill,
gonna
don't
if
happen.
care what neighborhood
no,
they live in. They just have to immerse the child. It doesn't
Yeah,
matter where they live.
and that's what I mean.
They
I
could
mean it's
live in the
more
country.
so to
All I
immerse
care.
the kid. I mean
They
it's
have
so
to
like
immerse
wherever
the
you
child.
immerse that kid, like it's an immersion. It's just like to learn a language. The best way to learn a language is to get dropped into the country, and you
Yes.
just left to your devices. You will figure it out after a while. You know what I'm saying?
bro, you take a black couple with a black child and drop them in Bedside Brooklyn is now, I don't know what the fuck they call it now. Bro, it's different. They're going to turn that area into a white suburb in a very short period of time, and it's not because they want to. I'm talking about well-meaning. I'm removing maliciousness. I'm talking about well-meaning white people moving into the hood, trying to do whatever the fuck they need to do. Bob is following right behind. Bob and Barbara is coming right behind them. Oh, this is a wonderful neighborhood. I had no clue.
You saying they gonna gentrify it. So you say don't move in, bring them
Gentrification.
and take your ass back because they gonna gentrify that too. They gonna whitewash that too.
That's what I'm saying. They can visit. They can come through.
But they
They can
don't
go to the
even need to visit. If you have if you create social programs that are designed to kind of help immerse these children anyway, that should solve the problem. I mean, just
That's a
like
great idea.
they have therapists and social workers that do this anyway. Instead of just doing that, create an actual program around it where
Right.
you're talking about these experiences. But then when you go to like a state like say Florida, where they're trying to act like all races are the same and there's no differentiation whatsoever, you have a lot of damaged children coming out of that. So it has to be some type of social program created that is the responsibility of that is to maintain culture. It's not to maintain assimilation, it's to maintain culture.
Culture.
That's a fact.
I 100% agree. I 100% agree. I like I said this just popped up. I mean, I saw this subject and I was like, man, that's one because again, I'm always thinking about like, man, it's so many young people, and I know I'm not raising my hand to adopt. I mean, there's other ways we can mentor, we can do so many other things, but I'm like, man, would I ever adopt? And when I think about it, I'm just like, And
No,
and
I'm
so
more
I
of a
know
mentor.
there's you say what?
I'm more of a mentor.
Right. I can do that. Mentorship, community participation. There's a lot of levels. When you tell me to raise one more,